She stepped out of her patrol car slowly, her uniform hanging loose on her small frame. The other officers smiled and shook their heads. Small town, small problems, small cop. Until she drew her weapon and hit a target 800 yards away with a single shot. What they didn't know was that this quiet woman once held the record for the longest confirmed kill in military history. Welcome to Daily Story. Before we continue this extraordinary story of hidden skill and quiet strength, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like these need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who serve in silence. The morning sun cast long shadows across Millfield's main street as Sarah Miller began her patrol. At 42, she had walked these same streets for 15 years, her boots worn smooth from countless miles of quiet service. Her patrol car, Unit 23, needed new brake pads and had a coffee stain on the passenger seat that never quite came out. The radio crackled occasionally with calls about loose dogs and noise complaints, but mostly it was silent. Millfield, population 6,847, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the biggest excitement was usually the annual corn festival, and where crime consisted mainly of teenagers drinking behind the old grain elevator. Sarah's badge number was 447, and she wore it with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else in her life. The other officers at the Millfield Police Department had long ago settled into their opinion of Sarah Miller. She was reliable, kind, and completely unthreatening. At 5 feet 5 inches and 130 pounds, she looked more like a school nurse than a cop. Her uniform always seemed a size too big, as if the department had ordered it for someone else. She had never drawn her weapon in the line of duty, never been in a high-speed chase, and never made an arrest that required more than a polite conversation and a firm handshake. Chief Walsh often said Sarah was the perfect community officer, great with kids, respectful to seniors, and diplomatic enough to diffuse any situation with words rather than force. What he didn't say, because he didn't know, was that Sarah Miller was perhaps the most dangerous person in a 500-mile radius. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at the station at 6:45 a.m., exactly as she had every working day for the past 15 years. She poured herself black coffee from the perpetually stale pot in the break room, checked the overnight reports, and prepared for another day of keeping the peace in a place where peace was rarely threatened. The call came from Regional Command just after 8 a.m. Annual weapons qualification and tactical training exercises would be held at the county range. All officers were required to attend. Sarah signed up without enthusiasm. She was a competent marksman. She had to be to keep her certification, but these events always made her uncomfortable. Too many memories she preferred to keep buried. The county training facility sat on 200 acres of rolling hills, 30 miles outside Millfield. When Sarah arrived in her aging cruiser, the parking lot was already half full with patrol cars, SUVs, and tactical vehicles from departments across 3 counties. Nearly 50 officers milled around the registration tables, most of them young men with tactical gear that looked like it had never seen real action. Sarah registered quietly, picked up her safety glasses and ear protection, and found a spot on the bleachers away from the main groups. She watched as officers clustered together, sharing stories and comparing equipment. The younger ones were especially boisterous, their confidence radiating from every gesture. Training Sergeant Mike Rodriguez called the group to order. A former Marine with 20 years of civilian law enforcement behind him, Rodriguez ran these sessions with military precision. "Today we're testing marksmanship skills at multiple distances," he announced. "We'll start at 25 yards and work our way out to 300 for those who qualify." The first group consisted of officers from the county sheriff's department, most in their 20s and 30s. They approached the firing line with swagger, adjusting their stances and checking their weapons with exaggerated professionalism. Brad Morrison from the neighboring Riverside PD stepped up first. At 28, He was built like a linebacker and carried himself like someone who had never met a challenge he couldn't handle. "Watch and learn, folks," he called out, glancing back at the assembled officers. His eyes stopped on Sarah for a moment, and his grin widened. "Especially you, Mama Sarah. Take notes." Brad's performance was solid. Respectable groupings at 25 and 50 yards, decent accuracy at 100. He scored 78 out of 100, well above the qualifying standard. The young officers cheered, and Brad took an exaggerated bow. Others followed with similar results. Scores ranged from 65 to 82, all passing, all acceptable for law enforcement standards. Sarah watched quietly, noting wind conditions, light angles, and the subtle ways each shooter's stance affected their accuracy. "Sarah Miller, Millfield PD," Rodriguez called out after 20 minutes. Sarah rose from the bleachers and walked to the firing line. The chatter died down as officers turned to watch. Some were curious, others amused. The quiet lady cop was about to show them what she could do. Sarah's approach to the firing line was different from the others. While they had strutted and posed, she moved with economy and purpose. She checked her weapon methodically. Slide action, sight alignment, magazine seating, with movements so practiced they seemed automatic. Her stance was textbook perfect. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight evenly distributed, shooting arm extended but not locked, support hand wrapped around the strong hand with precise finger placement. Her breathing was controlled, deep, and measured. She looked less like a small-town cop and more like something else. First distance, 25 yards. Sarah fired 5 rounds in steady succession. When the target was brought forward, a perfect cluster sat dead center, all 5 holes within a 2-inch circle. "Nice shooting," Rodriguez called out, genuinely impressed. The officers around the line began paying attention. 50 yards. Again, 5 steady shots. This time, the grouping was even tighter. All 5 rounds within an inch of each other, perfectly centered. The murmur from the watching officers grew louder. This wasn't luck. 100 yards. Sarah's stance didn't change, but her preparation became more deliberate. She studied the target through her sights for nearly 30 seconds, then fired 5 rounds with the same steady rhythm. Perfect center mass, grouping so tight it looked like 3 shots instead of 5. "Outstanding," Rodriguez said, his military bearing evident in his appreciation for genuine skill. "Sarah, you've qualified for extended range. Want to try 200? Sarah simply nodded. At 200 yards, the watching officers had gone completely quiet. This distance separated casual shooters from serious marksmen. Sarah took her time, adjusting for wind and distance with minute movements that spoke of extensive training. 5 shots. 5 perfect hits. "This is impossible," Brad muttered to another officer. "She's got to be lucky." Rodriguez heard him. "Luck doesn't group like that, son. Sarah, we've got targets out to 500 yards if you're interested." For the first time, Sarah spoke. "What about 800? Rodriguez paused. 800 yards was sniper range, used only for specialized training that most law enforcement never encountered. "We've got an 800-yard steel target on the back range. It's just a steel plate, no scoring rings." "That's fine." The group migrated to the extended range, 40 officers following one small-town cop to see what she would do with a shot that challenged even military snipers. The steel target at 800 yards looked like a dinner plate in the distance. Sarah spent 5 minutes studying the shot. She watched grass move in the wind, felt air temperature and humidity, calculated the bullet's trajectory over a distance where physics became as important as marksmanship. Finally, she took her position. The range went completely silent. Even Rodriguez held his breath. Sarah's shot seemed to take forever to reach the target. Then, clear and sharp across the distance, came the unmistakable ring of bullets striking steel. The silence stretched for 5 full seconds before someone started clapping. Then everyone was applauding, even Brad Morrison. Rodriguez walked over to Sarah as she safetied her weapon. "Ma'am, I've been running these qualifications for 12 years. I've never seen shooting like that from anyone outside special operations. Where did you train?" Sarah looked at him for a moment, weighing her answer. "Different places," she said finally. "Different times." That should have been the end of it. Sarah packed up her gear, accepted congratulations with gracious nods, and drove back to Millfield. But word spread quickly through law enforcement channels. By evening, videos of her shooting were circulating on police forums. By the next morning, Sarah Miller was being discussed in places she had hoped never to be mentioned again. 3 days later, Sarah was writing a parking ticket on Main Street when her radio crackled with an unfamiliar urgency. All units. Code red situation at First National Bank. Armed robbery in progress. Multiple hostages confirmed. Sarah's blood went cold. In 15 years at Millfield, they had never had a code red. She abandoned the parking ticket and raced toward downtown, her aging cruiser pushing harder than it had in years. The scene at First National was chaotic. Local officers had cordoned off a 2-block area, but they were clearly out of their depth. Chief Walsh was on his radio, trying to coordinate with County SWAT, but the nearest tactical team was 90 minutes away. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, approaching the command post. "One gunman, identified as Marcus Webb," Walsh explained rapidly. "Wanted on federal charges. Nothing to lose. He's got 6 hostages, including 2 children, barricaded inside with enough ammunition to hold off an army. He's already fired warning shots at responding officers." Sarah studied the bank building. 2 stories, flat roof, limited access points. The gunman would have clear sight lines on all approaches. "SWAT ETA?" she asked. "Hour and a half. Minimum. We can't wait that long." "He's getting more agitated by the minute." That's when Officer Brad Morrison, who had driven up from Riverside to assist, spoke up. "Chief, you saw what Sarah did at training. Maybe she can help." Walsh looked at Sarah with new eyes. "Sarah, what do you think? Would you be able to?" Sarah was already assessing angles and distances. The bank's roof was 200 yards from the tallest building across the street, the old grain elevator that dominated Millfield's skyline. A difficult shot, but not impossible. Not for someone with her background. "I'll need to get elevated," she said. "And I'll need a better rifle than my service weapon. How about this?" Rodriguez had arrived from the county, bringing tactical equipment. He pulled a precision rifle from his truck, a Remington 700 with a quality scope. "I brought this in case SWAT needed backup." Sarah examined the rifle professionally, checking the scope calibration and testing the trigger pull. It was a good weapon, properly maintained. "This will work." 20 minutes later, Sarah was prone on the grain elevator's roof, the rifle stable on a makeshift rest, studying the bank through the scope. She could see the gunman clearly through the large front windows, an agitated man in his 30s, wearing a tactical vest, holding an assault rifle. He was pacing, shouting at the hostages, his movements becoming more erratic. "Ghost, this is Control." The voice in her earpiece made her freeze. Nobody had called her by that call sign in 15 years. "Who is this?" she whispered. "Rodriguez. I ran your name through some old channels after the range. Figured we might have some mutual acquaintances. Sarah understood. Rodriguez wasn't just an ex-Marine. He was connected to the community she had left behind. Range is 200 yards, she reported, falling back into old patterns. Wind is negligible. Target is agitated, unpredictable movement pattern. Can you make the shot? Sarah watched the gunman through her scope. He was using the hostages as shields, never fully exposing himself. It would require perfect timing and absolute precision. Affirmative. But I need him isolated from the hostages for at least 3 seconds. Copy that. Stand by. Below, Chief Walsh's voice boomed through a megaphone. Marcus Webb, this is the police. We want to talk. Come to the front window where we can see you. Webb moved toward the window, dragging a hostage with him. Not good enough. Webb, release the children. They can't help you negotiate. Show good faith. Webb hesitated, then roughly pushed the 2 children toward the back of the bank. For a moment, he stood alone at the window, rifle in his hands but not aimed at anyone. Target isolated, Sarah whispered. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate with techniques learned in another life. The crosshairs settled on center mass. She began her trigger pull, smooth and steady, taking up the slack until the rifle fired almost as a surprise. The shot took 0.6 seconds to travel 200 yards. Webb dropped instantly. The threat ended with surgical precision. Target down, Sarah reported, then carefully safetied the rifle. The hostages were secured within minutes. Webb was dead before paramedics arrived. A single shot, center mass, textbook execution of long-range marksmanship under pressure. Chief Walsh found Sarah breaking down the rifle as calmly as if she had been cleaning her patrol car. "Sarah," he said quietly, "who are you really?" She looked at him for a long moment. Around them, federal agents were arriving, crime scene teams were deploying, and the media was setting up their cameras. Soon, questions would be asked that she had been avoiding for 15 years. "I'm Officer Sarah Miller, Millfield PD," she said finally. "Badge number 447. But Walsh pressed. "That shooting, that was military precision. Special operations precision." Sarah finished packing the rifle case. "Chief, some stories are better left untold." That evening, after the last reporter had left and the street barriers had been removed, Sarah sat in her small apartment above the bakery that had been closed for 5 years. The phone had been ringing all day. Reporters, federal agents, old contacts she thought she would never hear from again. She poured herself a glass of wine and looked at the box she kept in her bedroom closet. Inside were things from another life, photographs of people who couldn't be named, commendations for operations that officially never happened, and a folded flag from a ceremony that honored colleagues who had died in places that weren't supposed to exist. The phone rang again. This time, she answered. "Is this Ghost?" The voice belonged to a past she had tried to forget. "Ghost is retired." "Maybe. But the world still needs her sometimes." Sarah looked out her window at Main Street, peaceful under the streetlights. Tomorrow there will be questions. Federal agents would want debriefings. The media would dig into her background. The quiet life she had built was probably over. "I don't do that work anymore," she said. "I know. But when you're ready to come back, we'll be here. The country has a short memory for heroes, but some of us remember. We remember Ghost." After she hung up, Sarah sat in the dark for a long time. Outside, Millfield slept peacefully, protected by officers who would never face the kinds of choices she had once made daily. It was a good life she had built here. Simple, honest, quiet. But as she looked at the box of memories from her other life, Sarah Miller wondered if peace was something she truly deserved, or just something she had been borrowing for 15 years. The next morning, she put on her uniform, pinned badge 447 to her chest, and went back to work. But now, when she walked the streets of Millfield, people looked at her differently. The quiet cop who had served them faithfully for 15 years was still there, but they knew now that she carried something else as well, something that made their small town a little safer, and the world a little more mysterious. In the end, Sarah Miller remained Officer 447, writing parking tickets and helping elderly residents with their groceries. But on a shelf in Chief Walsh's office, next to commendations from the state and a letter of appreciation from the FBI, sat a small plaque that read simply, "Sometimes heroes hide in plain sight." Because sometimes the most powerful people are those who choose to use their power quietly, protecting others not for glory or recognition, but because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, when the world needs them most, they step out of the shadows just long enough to remind us all what true strength looks like.